Well, hello there. You are watching the press preview. A first look at what is on the front pages in the next half hour. Then we'll see what's making the headlines with the broadcaster and commentator Ali Miraj and the writer and broadcaster Kate Bevan. Welcome and great to see both of you. So let's check out the front pages, shall we? Starting with The Observer, who's been speaking to a former Labour policy chief who says that Keir Starmer is lacking a clear sense of purpose after straying from traditional party values and may not make one of its more successful prime ministers. The Sunday Times has a poll which says 32% of people would prefer Starmer as PM against 22% for Rishi Sunak. But the number of undecided, it says, gives fresh hope to the Tories. Daily Express reports that Rishi Sunak is planning more tax cuts in advance of the next general election to build what he calls a brighter future for everyone. The Telegraph, meanwhile, says the Conservatives are planning to use the next budget to force Keir Starmer to reveal his own spending plans, hoping to show that he'd push the country deeper into debt. Mail on Sunday claims an exclusive with news that hundreds of what it calls pampered Whitehall civil servants are now on contracts which allow them to work from home full-time. The Mirror says the government has commissioned a major poll to ask the public for their verdict on the future of the monarchy and says senior royals will be given the results. Happy Blue Year, that's the People's prediction for the New Year's celebrations, which it says are likely to be marred by a tornado, would you believe? Floods and freezing weather. While the Star also looks ahead to the celebrations and says, wait for it, that 50 million drinks will be downed for what it calls Happy Booze Year, the wildest one for a decade. And finally, The Sun on Sunday tells us that in-betweener star Emily Attack is expecting her first child. Congratulations to her, of course. Now, a reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers for yourself while you listen to our guests. So let's head straight to Ali and to Kate as well. Welcome to both of you. And we kick off, don't we, with The Express, which is part of the New Year's messages we've had from our politicians, and the Sunday Express, Kate, picking out the bit that suggests there might be more tax cuts to come.
Yes, I mean, The Express is basically sort of full of possibly forlorn hope given the state of the polls. It's massively talking up what the New Year message says and what Rishi Sunak is hoping to do. I mean, it's talking in grand terms about the national insurance cut, which works out at something like £450 a head, and they're gung-ho about Conservatives insisting they can win the next election despite trailing in the polls, which John Curtis in the column next door points out is 16 points the trailing gap. So it's a big gap for them to close. And there's some speculation about what the date of the election is going to be. So, yes, it's all very gung-ho in The Express, isn't it?
Look, I think Rishi Sunak has given a direction of travel. He has reduced national insurance by 2%. He is going to be under a lot of pressure now to reveal more tax cuts. We know that Jeremy Hunt, the Treasury, announced that the budget would now be on March the 6th. There's some speculation there'll be a May election. I don't buy that, quite frankly. I think Rishi Sunak is going to hold on for dear life to the very bitter end on this. So I don't see an election happening in May. But certainly he's going to be under a lot of pressure from wings of his party to cut taxes. Now, they've been kite-flying what these tax cuts are going to be. It may be national insurance. That might be a very aspirational thing that they're trying to do. We don't know, but there will be definitely more to come. But with the Tories 16 points behind in the polls, with that Rwanda plan going absolutely nowhere, we'll see what happens on that. A lot more problems to come. He's got another by-election coming up in Wellingborough where they're probably going to take another hammering, quite frankly, given what's happened before. It's looking pretty dire for the Tories at the moment. So I don't envy Rishi Sunak's job. He's trying to do his best in very difficult circumstances. But on the day when you've just had an honours list where Liz Truss, the summer internship Prime Minister, has put three of only 49 days. Come on, I know the government believes in internships, but there is a limit here. Three people in the Lords. I mean, come on. These people are going to be in the legislature for life. So the problem with the Tories at the moment is that they are a totally debased party. And I say this as a former Tory candidate, for heaven's sake. I take no pleasure in saying it whatsoever. We're being governed badly. Rishi Sunak's trying to do a decent job. He's a hard-working, credible, sensible guy. But he's presiding over a complete and utter debacle.
Yeah, it feels like they're flailing for ideas, aren't they?
Well, tax cuts is where they've landed on, possibly.
But also, the thing about saying that they're going to do tax cuts, it also highlights up actually just how enormous the tax burden is. It's the highest it's been for decades, isn't it?
But then what did we expect? There was COVID, where we had to spend billions on that, 400 billion we had to spend on COVID. So people forget very quickly. The public are very unforgiving to politicians. It was only a couple of years ago when Sunak was being lauded as the Chancellor for introducing the furlough scheme very quickly. And now he's like, the key figure to be poked fun at.
Yeah, before we move on to the Sunday Telegraph, just the bottom of this story down here. Starmer's 5 big pledges for victory listed in his New Year's message, launching his bid, they say, to win power in 2024. They are... or include ending the cost of living crisis, taking back our streets, getting the NHS back on its feet, cheaper energy bills and more opportunities for children. They're even more generic than Rishi Sunak's 5. Or even the Edstone. Do you remember the Edstone 5?
If you put them
back in the day, why do we need 5? Why is it only 5?
Oh, so if you put them side by side from both of those party leaders, you wouldn't know which was which, really. They're so, as you say, they're so generic.
Well, look, I think with Starmer, he's got 2 things going for him compared to 2019. One, he's not Jeremy Corbyn, and 2, Brexit's been done, however badly that has been done. And it's only a minority of the public, about 6%, that think Brexit has actually yielded any benefits at all. So Starmer, yes, look, they're woolly pledges. They're not very well fleshed out. But if I was a Starmer advisor, I would say, don't at any cost flesh out anything at all. Keep it as vague as possible for as long as possible.
Which takes us to the front of the Sunday Telegraph, which is Number 10's plan to expose Labour's debt risks. The Conservatives, they say, are planning to use the budget to wrong-foot Sir Keir Starmer on borrowing to try to show that under Labour, Britain would go further into debt.
What made me chuckle about this, though, is that this almost basically says, look, we're expecting to lose the election and we're stuffed. We know we're stuffed. Now we're just setting bear traps. And if by some utter miracle they do win, the Tories are also going to be completely hobbled by this anyway. So, it feels like, again, an attempt just to throw things out in the hope that something sticks.
But does the nation want us to get more into debt now in order not to have another period of austerity? If we're going to get tax cuts, there's got to be a squeeze at some point.
Well, there's going to have to be a squeeze, and there's going to have to be a reckoning, and that's why I personally wasn't in favour.
At a time when public services clearly need investment.
Well, exactly. I wasn't in favour of tax cuts. Although I'm a tax cutter at heart, I do not believe that now is the time or place for tax cuts. Not when you've got doctors striking, not when you've got the public sector writ large asking for pay increases in very, very difficult circumstances. Now, what they're doing here is that at the moment, the way that the fiscal rules work is that debt has to fall as a percentage of national income, as a share of national income over the next 5 years. What they want to try and do is look at the debt service costs as a percentage of GDP, and they want to impose a boundary on that too. And they believe that Labour is going to open the spending tax. But to be fair to Labour, they've not said anything about spending at all. In fact, Wes Streeting, the shadow Health Secretary, he's been actually saying it's all about reform. He's been going around the world. He was in Singapore the other week, right? Talking about we're not going to have lots of money. He wants to make it more patient-centred. He wants to make it more preventative. But he's saying you can't solve these issues by simply splashing cash. So the unions in the Labour Party better wise up, because there's not going to be lots of spending tax being opened up.
I mean, what is fascinating about these New Year's Eve newspapers is how political they are.
Very political.
Which makes you realise what a big political year it's going to be.
Huge.
So we continue, I'm afraid. The Sunday Times, come on to matters, Sue, as well. It's just a sort of a cheery time of year. But anyway, Starmer beat Sunak head-to-head. 32% prefer the Labour leader, while 22% back the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. I mean, this is difficult, isn't it? When the PM's been constantly clobbered and Sir Keir Starmer's doing that thing in politics where they say just going small, don't they? This idea of just, keep a low profile.
Yeah, I mean, even in... this polling is actually pretty disastrous for Starmer, because even in his own constituency of Richmond, North Yorkshire, which is Tory territory, they're saying they prefer Starmer as leader. So, I mean, I think that, barring all sorts of, barring upsets that we can't possibly foresee, Starmer is going to be out at some point next year.
Sunak. Well, Starmer might be out too.
Well, Sunak, you never know, do you? No, Sunak is going to be out next year. Goodness me, it is late, isn't it, at the end of the year? But, again, there's a 10-point gap there, just in who people prefer.
But Kate, it's interesting because no one is enthused by Labour whatsoever. Every time I do a phone-in on my show about Labour, no one wants to call in. It's the most boring... offer to voters.
Well, look,
It's
stop
simply
there,
people are
because you're
tired.
leading me into everything. That's the Observer's front page. Right, Starmer lacks a clear sense of purpose, which is fascinating, from a left-leaning politician to a left-wing publication. What's going on here? What's the story, first of all?
Well, the story is that John Cruddas has written a book to commemorate 100 years of the Labour movement, and he's basically pointing out that Starmer is a decent guy. He's a credible person. He's a lawyer. He's not some sort of person who he can't be trusted or believed in. But there's nothing particularly to hang your hat on with Starmer. He says he's a very difficult leader to reach. No one knows what he really truly stands for. And in terms of he also points out inequality. Has he really talked about inequality? Has he talked about economic policy, the philosophy of the Labour Party when it comes to Starmer's plan? So Cruddas, very much on the left of the party, is really not buying the Starmer elixir. But the problem is, I mean, the Labour Party has got a great tendency, like all parties do, to try and lose elections, at least certain parts of the party have. But Starmer, look, he's brought the party a long way since 2019. He was completely unelectable under Corbyn. So you've got to give Starmer credit for pulling the Labour Party, getting rid of the anti-Semitism issue, pulling it into a position where it could be electable.
Yes, and I suppose shaped by Tony Blair, and slightly Tony Blair light, you might argue.
It is
But
light.
under Tony Blair, there was really, strict parameters, wasn't there? There was great party unity, and perhaps that is what he's now delivering.
Yes, and also you kind of feel that there was an exasperation when I was looking at X, as we must now call Twitter, earlier. There was a lot of exasperation from Labour people saying, every time we're ahead, there are people, shooting us in the foot from our own side, a sort of circular firing squad. And I suspect Starmer and the Labour leadership this evening is like, can you guys just shut up and let the Tories get on with messing it up, rather than, throwing up these flares?
Well, I will say that under Blair, they had a long time to actually get their policy plan together. The first 100 days, you remember, independence of the Bank of England, they had it underpinned by a social political philosophy called the Third Way. Anthony Giddens at the LSE, he was director when I was there, had fleshed out this policy, which was basically capitalism with a human face, and they were going to open the spending taps in the second term. They had done a lot of heavy lifting and hard thinking. And you remember that pledge card that Labour came out with in '97?
Did it have 5 pledges on it?
I think it had 5 pages on it. It was very easy to understand. But as Blair said, the situation that Starmer faces now is a lot more difficult than the situation he faced in '97, where the economy was actually doing a lot better.
Well, welcome back. You're watching the press preview. With me once again, the broadcaster and commentator Ali Mirage and the writer and broadcaster Kate Bevan. Welcome back to both of you. So let's head to the front page of the Sunday Telegraph now, which talks about Eurostar's woes today. What will happen tomorrow? Well, we're told that all services are running, but there will be speed restrictions and presumably a backlog, Ali, as well.
There's going to be a very big backlog. There are 30,000 people that have been affected by this. It looks like this water in the tunnel. It looks like some sort of fire coolant system burst over there, and it's created absolute havoc. So 30,000 people affected, 41 different services. And this is clearly the time when people are trying to get back home after the Christmas period. New Year is upon us. It's going to put absolute things in havoc. People trying to potentially find accommodation in the capital overnight as well.
Just before New Year's Eve celebration.
Very difficult, where things are very busy in London anyway. So really a very difficult time uncapping what's been quite a difficult week for people on the travel front.
And I know
anyway.
you know these routes well, don't you? So Ebbsfleet International, in Kent seems to be where the problem is. And who's responsible for this?
Well, it seems like it's HS1, which is the company that sort of runs the infrastructure, and then South Eastern trains run on top of that, and the Eurostar trains run on top of that down to the Channel Tunnel. And, it's this patchwork of who's responsible, who carries the can, bucks being passed. And the upshot is just this chaos. I mean, I know that route well because I've got a family in East Sussex. And when it runs, it's fantastic. But the whole Christmas period for travel has just been, a mess of no trains on Boxing Day, trains being cancelled, people not being able to get seats. And also I saw earlier today that people were booking flights to Paris and to Amsterdam, and prices were up to like £900 for a flight to Paris. So it's really a bit of a shambles this year.
And you talked earlier about no goodwill in the Rota as well because of all the strike action we've been having. The old sense of broken Britain, you know, hitting international tourism.
Well, definitely, and it's not just Paris, but it's also the trains that are going to Brussels and Amsterdam as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go on to strike action elsewhere, shall we? Which is the Observer, down the bottom of their front page. The strike action will sink Sunak's NHS waiting list vow. We've already seen that happening, haven't we, Ali?
Well, it is one of his things to reduce waiting lists, and there's 7.7 million people on the waiting list at the moment, and you're going to have a 6-day strike starting next week by junior doctors. Now, what they want is restorative pay by 35% pay increase, which I think is just not going to work right now. I understand where they're coming from. I have full sympathy with junior doctors and wanting to be paid a decent wage for the very difficult job that they do. But 35% is not a serious basis for negotiation. And I think what's going to happen here is that they're going to end up in a similar position to what the Royal College of Nursing ended up with, wasting a lot of time, many, many months. This has been going on since February, until a decision and an accommodation is reached. But the government should still be negotiating with them. They didn't take the 3% additional on top of the, I think it was 8% offer that they were given. They want 35%. They're playing hardball, but the people that are going to suffer here are patients, and a number of operations and scheduled appointments have been cancelled.
Yes, and I see the top of the Sunday Times, actually. Thousands of cancer patients had crucial hospital appointments cancelled at least 3 times last year. So you start to see the impact on that. We've only got a minute left. Kate, do apologise for moving on, which is the number in the Daily Star. 50 million drinks on New Year's Eve. That's quite a lot, isn't it?
But what you don't know is what's it been in previous years? Numbers are no good unless you've got something to compare them to. I used to work for the FT.
But I know suppose in COVID years, the point is it's
well,
not
exactly.
That's why they're saying it's the wildest New Year's Eve for a decade.
Well, I should be going to Ministry of Sound tomorrow with my nieces and nephews, my little nieces and nephews, for a daytime rave.
Oh, daytime.
So you'll be home in bed by midnight.
That's
so
all right.
Never too early to introduce the house music.
You can get home and watch me doing New Year's Eve and not drink inside, I tell you anyway. See you both a little bit later on. Ali Mirage, Kate Bevan, thank you both very much indeed.